Hello, everybody, in Fine Arts 104. Continuing with our video lecture series, I wanted to clarify a little bit just how we are going to be approaching the topics for the rest of the semester. We've worked through those formal elements of cinema style, which was our topic last week, being sort of the summary of that half of class. Two-thirds of class, however the math works out in the end, where we are looking at the specific parts of how a movie is constructed, the choices filmmakers confront when they are trying to work with those formal elements, and how that can all come together in a particular style. And we'll come back to particular filmmakers and their styles in a couple of weeks here. But what we're going to turn to for the rest of the semester is an exploration not necessarily of how movies are made, but how they are interpreted. The job of us as audience members, as all of you are, as film academics of some sort here, at least film students, and then also how critics and thinkers have interpreted film over the years. These are the different sort of critical perspectives, we might say, or modes of spectatorship. I'm sure there's a lot of other academic jargon that gets used for this sort of term. I will admit I don't love academic jargon. It was one of those things that drove me crazy in graduate school, so I will do my best not to rely on it too terribly much. Now, all of that being said, our topic for this week is the first of those modes of analysis, modes of spectatorship, whatever phrase you want to use, and this is genre. Genre is a concept that I'm sure you're all familiar with even before taking the class, but it's worth exploring a little bit in the context of our cinema studies because it is one of the most familiar and therefore perhaps one of the most powerful ways of understanding a film, putting it in its critical context, so to speak. So just to define it for us really quickly, a genre is a classification of movies based upon their shared elements. In cinema studies, those shared elements are called conventions, genre conventions. And these consist of formal elements, usually parts of the narrative, parts of the theme, parts of the style, or perhaps parts of the setting. All of those are sources of potential genre conventions. Essentially, genres exist as a category of film. And genres, of course, exist outside of film. There's TV genres, book genres, music genres, all of these sorts of things. And what they do is provide a relatively stable set of categories that we can use to distinguish what a film is trying to do, what it is trying to say, what story it's trying to tell, what tradition it's trying to work with it. And that is useful for us as spectators. Maybe you like one genre more than another. Personally, I like westerns a lot more than I like sci-fi, which means that I'm kind of out of step with American popular cinema right now. Sci-fi is incredibly popular, and I'm not mad about that. But if we were making $300 million westerns every couple of months, I would not complain. I don't know. I don't know how you spend $300 million on a western, in all honesty, but I'm sure Disney will try. Well, actually, they did try. It was called the oh, what was it called? It starred Johnny Depp as a Native American, and it was a big flop. It doesn't matter. Anyway, um, so genres provide us maybe with a sense of what we like and what we don't like. They also provide us with a set of expectations. If you go to see a science fiction or a superhero movie, you will probably expect to see a fair amount of action and adventure. I don't think you would sit down to watch a superhero movie and expect to see a whole bunch of romantic intrigue. I don't think you would expect to see slapstick humor, at least not a whole bunch of it, these sorts of things. So genres also provide us with a frame not just of what we like and what we don't like, but also a frame of expectations. And that is actually part of the fun of studying genres because no movie is going to have every convention for that particular genre. And no movie, or at least, yeah, I would say no movie really tries to hit every single expectation for its genre. That's part of what provides pleasure for the viewers. There's a lot of elements that are familiar in a particular genre's film, and then there are parts where the film will tweak those conventions or those expectations a little bit. They'll make their slight alterations, maybe slight, sometimes more dramatic, and that will provide the familiar part provides a sense of stability for the viewer, and the part that gets tweaked provides a sense of change, of renewal, of surprise, those things that we enjoy when we go to the movies. And so both of those provide a distinct pleasure for us as film goers, and that's why genres are so useful as a way of studying film. So all that being said, it is worth noting that just based on the format that we have to use here, we don't get to do one of my favorite parts of this lesson, which is just trying to create a big list of American film genres. That's something that can usually take up 15-20 minutes of class, and it's always a lot of fun. I am almost certainly going to do that as one of the discussion boards for you this week, though, so you'll have that as a way of as a way of thinking through this topic here. But what I think we can talk about a little bit is just getting a sense of how certain conventions set up certain genres. They signify certain genres. So the original screening that we had for this week is Blazing Saddles, which is still something you could watch. I think it's one you have to rent or buy if you want to watch it. But Blazing Saddles is a Western. And so you should ask yourself, walking in, what are the conventions of a Western? What are the parts of that movie that make it clear I'm watching a Western and not anything else? Okay, so I think at the simplest level, some of the iconic genre conventions of Westerns: cowboy hats, those Stetsons that are so heavily associated with that particular genre, to the point that if you see a character wearing a cowboy hat in a different genre, it usually means they're trying to connect that character with Western stories, Western character types, these sorts of things. So the cowboy hat, riding on horses instead of on automobiles. Though that being said, trains usually play a big role in Westerns. Those are kind of the two major forms of transportation: ponies or locomotives. The setting is typically in the American Old West, which is both a geographical and a historical setting. Generally speaking, that would mean basically anywhere west of the Mississippi River to the Pacific Coast in California, in what's now the territorial United States, though some Westerns do travel up to Canada, some do travel down to Mexico. But that's the geographical setting there, the West in American geography. And the historical setting is very specific as well. Typically, Westerns are probably situated between about 1840 and 1900, about 60 years there, the middle. That second half of the 1800s. You will find some Westerns that pop up much later. There's a couple of recent Westerns that from the past decade or so that are set in basically contemporary times. A couple of years ago, there was a Western bank heist film called Hell or High Water. God, that movie is good. But that was set in 2016, the year that it was released. But it was definitely a Western based on a lot of elements. You weren't riding horses, but the setting was correct. The character types were correct. The story was correct. The themes were correct. It was a Western, even though it was set in 2016 Texas and not 1816 Texas, if that makes sense. The other example that popped in my head is the film No Country for Old Men, which similarly set in Texas, has familiar Western character types, familiar Western story to some degree, but it's set in 1980, and it has as much to do with the drug trade as it does anything else. And the drug trade is usually not something seen in traditional Westerns, but I would find it very hard to argue that No Country for Old Men is not a Western based on other genre conventions. So you can see there's a particular time and place for Westerns, but it can also break out of that particular time and place. The other stuff I would expect to see in Westerns, I think you would see as a theme some sort of conflict between civilization and wilderness. That's usually the central thematic conflict that's happening in a Western. Usually the cowboys are bringing civilization into a wild place. Sometimes that is through conflict with Native Americans. Sometimes it's through that pioneering of exploration and settlement and colonization and all of this sort of stuff. But that's a pretty constant theme. And then you also tend to see, and it's odd to say that this is a genre convention, but this tends to be a very male genre. The number of Western movies that have a prominent female character, relatively low. Not unheard of course, but like a female lead in a Western, that's particularly rare. So Westerns are very masculine. And I think a lot of them actually wind up interrogating that to some degree. They talk to the audience about the flaws in these men. I think that's why I like them in a lot of ways, but it's also worth noting, Westerns have tended to be more popular with male audiences than female audiences because it mainly features men and it mainly features traditionally masculine stories and themes. That sets up our expectations again, right? So you get a sense just from what little I mentioned there about how the genre conventions and the genre expectations tell you what to expect from a Western movie. Now, that being said, if you're watching Blazing Saddles, that is a satirical Western, which means it's taking all of those genre conventions and making fun of them in order to make a point. That's why I like showing that in the lesson about genre, because it is very conscious of how to look and feel like a Western, and also completely pulls the rug out of what a Western should look and sound and feel like in order to make you laugh, but also to make a point, specifically a point about American racism. It's a great film. It's a really great film. Am I gonna? No, my DVD is at the college. I can't watch it this week. Oh well. Now, that being said, I do want us to think about genre films more broadly a little bit before we move past it here. Most film critics and film academics for a long time didn't take genre films, as they're called, very seriously. Genre films tended to be westerns, science fiction films, mystery and detective films, melodramas, which were typically a female directed or a genre directed towards women, not always female directors. That was rare, still is rare. These things were not seen as the same level of seriousness or the same level of importance as other film genres or other film styles. And I think part of that is because genre films tend to be popular. Right now, the most popular genres are science fiction and superheroes, and there's a lot of writing and a lot of thinking about superhero and science fiction films. But if you look at what wins awards from critics or from awards bodies like the Oscars, it's never science fiction or superhero films. There is one superhero movie ever nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. That was Black Panther just last year. And has never been a science fiction film that won the award for Best Picture. I think the closest is maybe The Shape of Water a couple of years ago. And that's a testament to the fact that what is most popular is not always the most respected. It's more common to see things that are respected that make fun or critique the popular. So that's an interesting aspect of film studies. The other thing that I think is interesting for us to think about when it comes to genre films is two quick things here at the end of the lecture. Number one, there are a lot of genres that decline in popularity. Westerns are, close to my heart, but, not the most popular thing in the world right now. Musicals, similarly, had a very popular run from about 1930 to about 1970, but they've been rare and relatively unpopular ever since 1970. And so it's interesting to look at genres as artifacts from that particular time in popular culture. If genre films are the most popular aspect of cinema in that moment, and then a genre declines, it's very tempting to read that decline in popularity and prestige as saying something about how culture itself is changing. People are changing. Tastes are changing. Why did Americans need to see a conflict between civilization and wilderness in the middle decades of the 20th century, but no longer need to see it in the late decades of the 20th century and the dawn of the 21st? I have thoughts about that. If you have thoughts, I would love to know them. The last thing that I think is worth mentioning about genre films is the way that filmmakers can use these conventions and expectations to revise what a genre means. You can see this, I guess perhaps one of the most famous examples is The Godfather, which is filmed and released back in the early 1970s. The Godfather is a gangster film, but it was filmed in a way that took gangster films much more seriously than previous examples had. Gangster movies back in the 1930s and 40s, they tended to be popular entertainment. They were all blood and guts and shootouts and thrills, that sort of thing. And that's not to say they were not good, but they were not treated as art. The Godfather treated them as art by treating the Corleone family as essentially operatic figures in American history. The Godfather itself, the first two movies, are essentially one giant metaphor for the immigrant experience in America and of the dangers and moral decay inherent to American capitalism. That's that's not what people had in their minds necessarily when they were making old gangster films like Angels with Dirty Faces. Not that that's a bad film, just not it's not revisionist in that way. And so that's another interesting part of how genre can provide an opportunity for filmmakers. You can take that traditional setup of a genre and use it, tweak it, change it, revise it to make a grand statement of your own. It is inevitable that somebody is going to do that with a superhero film. Black Panther kind of did that. I think if Black Panther had been a little like it's a great film, but if it had been a little crazier, it might have been a revisionist superhero film. And there have been revisionist sci-fi films, just not as popular as the Star Warses of the universe. But revising expectations and conventions in a genre is a great way of commenting upon and critiquing the genre itself and the themes, the needs that are spoken to by that particular genre. Okay. Well, if you have any questions, you know where to find me on email, Brightspace, Zoom meetings, that sort of thing. And I hope everybody is having a good week. Have a good one.